Why language and culture matter more than ever? In a world shaped by rapid technological change, artificial intelligence, and global mobility, our greatest challenges, climate change, migration, inequality, polarization, story waiting to be heard. Our responsibility is to create spaces for peaceful dialogue. We are gathered today, thanks to the Bengaluru City University, not to simply analyze languages and cultures, but to activate them, to use them as instruments for preventing conflict, strengthening coexistence, building empathy, and promoting global citizenship. Let us imagine a world where classrooms teach cultural dialogue as carefully as they teach mathematics. A world where the ability to listen across differences is valued as much as the ability to code. A world where peace is not a dream, but a daily practice, trained, cultivated, and shared. And to conclude, peace begins with the words that we choose. Let me close by reminding that peace does not begin in treaties, institutions, or international organizations. Peace begins in conversations, small, humble, everyday conversations. In our homes, our classrooms, our communities, peace begins each time we say, "Help me understand. What is your story? Tell me more." And to leave you with one final light-hearted yet insightful quote from George Bernard Shaw. He said, I quote, "The single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it has taken place." May this conference break that illusion. May it spark real communication, real understanding, and real peace. Thank you, and let our dialogues begin.
Thank you, sir, for your inaugural speech. It was very enlightening. ಅವರು ಮಾಡಿದ ಭಾಷಣದ ಒಂದು ಸಂಕ್ಷಿಪ್ತ ವಿವರಣೆಯನ್ನು ಕೊಡ್ತೀನಿ ನಾನು. ಪ್ರೊಫೆಸರ್ ಫ್ಯಾಡಿ ಫ್ಯಾಡಲ್ ಅವರು ESPN ಗ್ರೂಪ್ ಲಾ ಸಾಲ್ ಫ್ರಾನ್ಸಿನ ಡೀನು ಮತ್ತು ಮುಖ್ಯ ಶೈಕ್ಷಣಿಕ ಅಧಿಕಾರಿಗಳಾಗಿ ಸೇವೆಯನ್ನು ಸಲ್ಲಿಸ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ. ಇದು ಅವರ ಮೊದಲ ಶೈಕ್ಷಣಿಕ ಪ್ರವಾಸವಾಗಿದ್ದು ಇದು ಅವ್ರಿಗೆ ತುಂಬ ಹರ್ಷವನ್ನು ತಂದಿದೆ, ತುಂಬ ಸಂತೋಷವಾಗ್ತಿದೆ ಅಂತ ತಿಳಿಸ್ತಾರೆ ನಮಗೆ. ಕೆಲವು ಭಾಷೆಯ ಕೇವಲ ಸಂವಹನಕ್ಕಲ್ಲ, ಅದು ಸಹಬಾಳ್ವೆಗೆ ಅವಶ್ಯಕತೆ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳಿದ್ರು. ಭಾಷೆ ಶಾಂತಿ ಮತ್ತು ಸಂಘರ್ಷಕ್ಕೆ ಕಾರಣವಾಗಿದೆ, ಆದರೆ ಈ ವೇದಿಕೆ ಒಂದು ಸೇತುವೆಯಾಗಿ ಹೇಗೆ ಭಾಷೆಯನ್ನು ಬಳಸಬೇಕು ಅನ್ನೋದ್ರ ಕಡೆ ಅವರು ಬೆಳಕನ್ನು ಚೆಲ್ತಾರೆ. ಸಂಸ್ಕೃತಿ ನಮ್ಮ ಅಸ್ಮಿಯತೆಯನ್ನು ರೂಪಿಸುತ್ತದೆ. ಎಲ್ಲ ಸಂಸ್ಕೃತಿಯು ಅದರದೇ ಆದಂತಹ ಚಿಂತನೆಗಳು ಮತ್ತು ಅದರದೇ ಆದಂತಹ ಆಲೋಚನೆಗಳನ್ನು ಹೊಂದಿರುತ್ತೆ. ನಾವು ಅದರ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಕುತೂಹಲವನ್ನು ವಹಿಸಬೇಕು. ಬರೀ ಕೇಳೋದಲ್ಲ, ಕುತೂಹಲದಿಂದ ಆ ಸಂಸ್ಕೃತಿಯನ್ನು ಪ್ರವೇಶಿಸಿದಾಗ ಮಾತ್ರ ಅಸಮಾನತೆ ಮತ್ತು ತಾರತಮ್ಯವನ್ನು ಹೋಗಲಾಡಿಸ್ಬೋದು ಅಂತ ತಿಳಿಸ್ತಾರೆ. ಒಂದು ಸ್ಪೇಸನ್ನು ಕ್ರಿಯೇಟ್ ಮಾಡಬೇಕು ಅಂದರೆ ಒಂದು ಅವಕಾಶವನ್ನು ಸೃಷ್ಟಿ ಮಾಡಬೇಕು ಇಂಥ ಮಾತುಗಳಿಗೆ, ಇಂಥ ಚಿಂತನೆಗಳನ್ನು ಬೆಳೆಸೋದಿಕ್ಕೆ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳ್ತಾರೆ. ಶಾಂತಿ ಪ್ರಾರಂಭವಾಗುವುದು ದಿನನಿತ್ಯದ ಸಂವಹನದಲ್ಲಿ ಮತ್ತು ನಮ್ಮ ದಿನನಿತ್ಯದ ಜೀವನದಲ್ಲಿ ಅಂತ ಅವರು ನಮಗೆ ಅವರ ಮಾತುಗಳಲ್ಲಿ ತಿಳಿಸ್ಕೊಡ್ತಾರೆ. ಧನ್ಯವಾದಗಳು ಸರ್. ಥ್ಯಾಂಕ್ ಯು ಒನ್ಸ್ ಅಗೇನ್ ಫಾರ್ ದಟ್ ವಂಡರ್ಫುಲ್ ಸ್ಪೀಚ್.
Thank you. As we deepen our reflections on language, culture, and world peace, we are reminded the quest for harmony transcends borders, disciplines, and even time zones. Today, we are profoundly honored to share a very special message, a message that comes to us from a voice that has echoed the halls of the Nobel Peace Prize ceremony itself. Mr. Ahmed Galay, Nobel Peace Laureate from Tunisia, human rights activist, advocate, and a steadfast champion of dialogue and dignity, has graciously taken the time to send us his thoughts, hopes, and blessings for this gathering. Though he could not be with us in person, his words have traveled across continents to reach us, to inspire us, and to challenge us. To remind us that peace is not passive, it is a practice, and language is one of its most powerful tools. So let us now receive his message with open hearts and minds.
ಈಗ ಸರ್ ಹಮ್ಮದ್ ಗಲೈ ತುನೀಸಿಯಾದ ಮಾನವ ಹಕ್ಕುಗಳ ಕಾರ್ಯಕರ್ತರು ಈ ಕಾರ್ಯಕ್ರಮಕ್ಕೆ ವಿಶೇಷವಾಗಿ ಒಂದು ಸಂದೇಶವನ್ನು ಕಳಿಸಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ಆ ವಿಡಿಯೋ ಸಂದೇಶವನ್ನು ಈಗ ನೋಡೋಣ.
Assalamu alaikum. Que la paix soit avec vous, mes chers amis et camarades, professeurs, étudiants et visiteurs de Bengaluru City University et chers militants aussi de AFPO, avec un animateur à sa tête, un animateur infatigable qui est Haroun, mon ami Haroun Rachid, Haroun le Sage. Je vous salue tous. Félicitations parce que vous êtes toujours au rendez-vous avec des dates importantes, avec des thématiques fondatrices, avec des idées nouvelles qui transforment le monde vers un meilleur de l'éducation, vers un futur de l'éducation et un futur du monde. Déjà il y a quelques semaines, on était à Manipal, à l'Université des Belles-Lettres et Philosophie, dans une thématique aussi proche de celle-là, aussi importante, celle de l'IA, synergie A25. On a débattu de l'impact de l'IA sur les langues, sur l'éducation. Aussi surtout on a vu comment conseiller la machine pour ne pas tomber dans les dérives possibles d'une science sans conscience qui serait ruine de l'âme, d'après rappelé dans son protocole. Donc je vous salue et je vous félicite pour ce choix très important, la paix, la culture, les langues, l'éducation, un ensemble assez important dans un monde qui est malheureusement ballotté par les guerres. Le nombre de guerres, vous le savez très bien, a augmenté, il a même triplé depuis la Deuxième Guerre mondiale. On a pensé que les guerres, ça y est, on ne vit plus de guerre, mais après la guerre mondiale, la deuxième, le nombre de guerres a augmenté, il a même touché plus de pays, il a changé de forme, il se transforme en guerre urbaine avec association de groupes armés qui ne sont pas donc classiques commandants, avec des civils comme victimes, en délit total avec le droit de l'homme et le droit militaire international. Donc ce colloque vient à point justement pour mettre le point. Comment on pourrait agir, comment on pourrait, par l'éducation, par les langues, par la culture, on pourrait aménager un nouveau monde, un monde sans guerre, un monde de paix, et comment on peut changer les mentalités des gens, comment agir sur leurs valeurs, sur leurs attitudes, sur leur comportement, parce que comme dit la charte la préambule de la charte de l'UNESCO, c'est dans la tête des gens que naissent les guerres, et c'est dans la tête des gens qu'on devrait bâtir les défenses de la paix. Donc une trilogie importante, langue, culture, paix, qui nous ramène à penser que les mouvements sociaux, les mouvements qui visent à rétablir la cohésion sociale et la paix mondiale, on peut commencer par des mouvements d'idées philosophiques, par des mouvements de culture. Pensez aux Lumières de France, à Condorcet, à Voltaire, à Montesquieu, à Diderot. Pensez aussi au Léviathan de Hobbes qui a changé aussi, qui n'a pas seulement été une philosophie, mais aussi un changement de rapport, de relation conceptuelle entre l'Église, l'État et la personne. Pensez aussi aux idées fondatrices de Tagore, l'Indien Tagore, et de Gandhi, qui avec leur pensée ont rétabli une cohésion sociale et ont transformé la vie des gens et ont libéré le pays. Il y a aussi beaucoup de changements dans le monde arabe. On parle de beaucoup de penseurs, de la Renaissance arabe, avec Al-Tartawi, Ahmed Amin, Mohamed Abdou. Chez nous ici en Tunisie, il y a le grand chantre de la Révolution, Abou Qasim Chabi, qui chante aussi les pouvoirs d'un peuple, a changé le cours de l'histoire. Donc voilà, c'est là notre mission, nous sommes en situation tous intellectuels, organiques, attachés à la cause d'un peuple, à la cause d'un monde qu'on voudrait plus apaiser. Nous sommes tous en situation, comme dirigeant Paul Sartre, nous devons nous engager pour utiliser ces vecteurs de paix qui sont l'éducation, la culture et la langue, pour qu'enfin on puisse apaiser ce terreau excité et pour que le monde soit plus paisible pour nos générations futures, pour les enfants qu'on est en train d'éduquer et de construire. Bien travaux, félicitations à vous, AFP avec à sa tête Haroun Rachid, Haroun Kumar, et aussi son équipe technique, mais aussi les dirigeants et ceux qui dirigent l'université Bengaluru City. Donc mes félicitations, mes sentiments les meilleurs pour un travail de consolidation de la paix mondiale. Merci beaucoup.
ಈಗ ಸರ್ ಅಹಮದ್ ಗಲೈ ತುನೀಸಿಯಾದ ಮಾನವ ಹಕ್ಕುಗಳ ಕಾರ್ಯಕರ್ತರು ಹೇಳಿದಂಥ ಮಾತುಗಳನ್ನು ಕೇಳಿದ್ವಿ. ಅವರು ತಂತ್ರಜ್ಞಾನ AI ಮತ್ತು ಸೈನರ್ಜಿಕ್ 25 ಹೇಗೆ ಶಾಂತಿಯನ್ನು ಕದಲುತ್ತಾ ಇದೆ ಅನ್ನೋದ್ರ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಪ್ರಸ್ತಾಪ ಮಾಡ್ತಾರೆ. ಯುದ್ಧಗಳು ಹೇಗೆ ನಮ್ಮ ಶಾಂತಿಯನ್ನು ಹಾಳು ಮಾಡ್ತದೆ, ಶಿಕ್ಷಣ ಮತ್ತು ಭಾಷೆ, ಅದು ಭಾಷೆಯ ಮೂಲಕ ನಾವು ನಮ್ಮ ಮನಸ್ಸಿನಲ್ಲಿ ಪ್ರಾರಂಭವಾಗುವ ಯುದ್ಧವನ್ನು ಹೇಗೆ ತಡೆಗಟ್ಟೋದು ಅನ್ನೋದನ್ನು ಅವರು ತುಂಬ ಸ್ಪಷ್ಟವಾಗಿ ಹೇಳ್ತಾರೆ. ಭಾಷೆ, ಸಂಸ್ಕೃತಿ ಮತ್ತು ಶಾಂತಿ, ಈ ಮೂರು ತತ್ವಗಳು ಶಾಂತಿ ಸ್ಥಾಪನೆಗೆ ತುಂಬ ಮುಖ್ಯ. ಅದರೊಂದಿಗೆ ಅವರು ಫ್ರೆಂಚ್ ತತ್ವಜ್ಞಾನಿಗಳಾದಂತಹ ಮಾಂಟೆಸ್ಕೋ, ಡೆಟ್ರಾಯ್ಟ್ ಅನ್ನೋರನ್ನು ಕೂಡ ನೆನಪಿಸ್ಕೋತಾ ಟ್ಯಾಗೋರ್, ಗಾಂಧಿಯನ್ನು ಕೂಡ ಪ್ರಸ್ತಾಪ ಮಾಡ್ತಾರೆ. ಅರಬ್ ತತ್ವಜ್ಞಾನಿಗಳು ಅಹಮದ್ ಅಮೀನ್ ಅನ್ನೋರ್ನು ಕೂಡ ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಪ್ರಸ್ತಾಪ ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಶಾಂತಿ ಕಾಪಾಡೋದ್ರ ಕಡೆಯಲ್ಲಿ ಎಲ್ಲರ ಪ್ರಯತ್ನವಿರಬೇಕು ಅಂತ ಹೇಳ್ತಾ ಅವ್ರ ಮಾತುಗಳನ್ನ ಮುಗಿಸ್ತಾರೆ.
Thank you, sir, for bringing to us that peace, the need for a conference as such, as it leads to conversations and topics of utmost importance in today's world. It is now our privilege to welcome our chief guest, Mr. Jigme Saltrum, Additional Secretary and Chief Representative Officer, South Zone, Central Tibetan Administration. His presence brings a thoughtful resonance to our theme, reminding us that peace is sustained by policies, not by policies, but by people who embody compassion in action. Sir, we request you to please address the gathering.
Before I address, I thought I should fix this mic. It's a slight problem. ಎಲ್ಲರಿಗೂ ನಮಸ್ಕಾರ. I'm sorry, my level of Kannada is only elementary part. So namaskara, kutkuru bani, that's it. Indeed, it's an honor for me to be here in this great event which witnesses the meeting of experts, academicians, and at the outset, I would like to extend my gratitude for Professor Ramesh, who is not here. Maybe he has gone to answer the nature call, I'm sure, or maybe some telephone. And of course to registrars and the experts from abroad, and also who are here in Bangalore for the last couple of years, I guess. And then the finance officer, who is the important part. And then the other experts that I can see here, the students. The day on which I received this invitation to speak and address, I felt privileged, but at the same time I was worried. And then this morning, the welcome session, especially the welcome address note by Professor Jyoti, the former personalities, their addresses were so long, I think, maybe 4 pages, 5 pages, I guess, but even then it was shortened, and I have only maybe 2 paragraphs. So I was worried that what should I be speaking with? and what should be the line that I should be touching with. But then I reflected upon my identity, that I belong to the second generation of Tibetans who have come to India, who now lives in 10 states and 2 UTs in India. And then for the last more than 6 decades, not only we have sustained our culture and our language, I believe and I hope that we have also enriched this anekta mein ekta and vibhinnata mein samanata. Having said that, it also gives me an honor to be here, although I'm addressing from here, but I feel the person who should be addressing here is my colleague, my friend, Dr. Tenzin Pasang. He is the principal of Dalai Lama Institute of Higher Education, which is now recognized by the Bangalore University. And I know how challenging it is to get the name of recognition. And particularly in India, when we struggle to preserve, when we struggle to learn our identity, there are many stories that you may find today in Google or AI, but there are some stories which you won't find in those sources. My grandparents, they came to India for 5 years on foot, reached India, and then they saw banana for the first time. They cooked it, they boiled it, then they came down to near to Arabian Sea on one side, the Bay of Bengal on the other side. And that's how we were introduced to Indian schools, of course the Hindi medium schools at that point of time. And that's how we learn about खूब लड़ी मर्दानी वो भी झांसी वाली रानी थी, दीप जलाओ आज दीपावली रे. So we learn about Hindi, we learn Sanskrit. And in this discourse, today as I stand here, this is also a recognition of the culture which is intertwined with language that we have sustained in exile, and for maybe more than a couple of centuries that we have sustained back in Tibet. And it is our Guru, the Bharata, that your chela, and as His Holiness said, not just a chela, but a reliable chela. So, the eminent personalities and the guests, Dr. Michael, Dr. Ferry, next time if you have time, please do visit Mulkot, Mysuru and Chamarajnagara. These are the centers of learning of Nalanda's Buddhism, where we have preserved for the last more than 6 decades. I don't need to elaborate on this. Professor Ramesh, he is a living witness to these centers, how they have been doing for the last couple of many years. Having said that, I just returned yesterday from Mundkot, which is in Uttar Kannada district. And His Holiness, the 14th Dalai Lama, is expected to visit in this December. He has visited particularly the southern part of India, particularly Karnataka, for more than 108 times. And Mundkot will be now the 29th time of this visit, being 1968 is the first time. तो ये हमारे लिए हर्ष का विषय है कि जहां एक और हम अपने भाषा संस्कृति और उसी भाषा और संस्कृति से हम संवाद की तरफ बढ़ रहे हैं और ग्लोबल विश्व शांति की बात हम कर रहे हैं, और दूसरी ओर हमारा ये प्रयास है, अमेरिका में, ब्रिटेन में, स्कॉटलैंड में, आयरलैंड में अंग्रेजी कहा जाता है, भाषा का उपयोग किया जाता है, लेकिन वहां अपने ही एक हो. भारत में भाषा अनेक है, संस्कृतियां अनेक है, जहां डॉक्टर B.R. अम्बेडकर ने कहा कि what will be the testament of a nation and a state? It is the will of the people. जहां हम लोग जन गण मन कहते हैं, कश्मीर का हो, नीचे कन्याकुमारी का हो, इधर ईटानगर का हो, इधर गांधीनगर का हो। तो इसी भाषा को हम लोग ध्यान में रखते हुए मैं यही सोच रहा था, क्योंकि समय ज़्यादा नहीं है, and we have already exceeded the refreshment time 11:30 to 11:45, so I thought I should stick to not more than 4 minutes. So therefore, I was having a feeling of privilege, a moment of challenge, that being belonging to the second generation of Tibetan in exile, yes, it's the language and the culture that goes ahead. Respect all the culture, practice your own culture. Respect all the language, but sustain your own language. And that is the path ahead for dialogue and for world peace. Thank you so much for listening to me.
Thank you, sir, for that wonderful speech. ಜಿಗ್ಮಿ ತುಸ್ರೀಮ್ ಅವರು ಹೆಚ್ಚುವರಿ ಕಾರ್ಯದರ್ಶಿಗಳು, ಮುಖ್ಯ ಪ್ರತಿನಿಧಿ ಅಧಿಕಾರಿಗಳು, ಕೇಂದ್ರ ಟಿಬೇಟಿಯನ್ ಆಡಳಿತದಲ್ಲಿ. ಅವರು ಇವತ್ತು ಮಾತಾಡಬೇಕಾದ್ರೆ ಅವರು ಹೇಗೆ ಭಾರತಕ್ಕೆ ಬಂದರು, 2ನೇ ತಲೆಮಾರಿನವರು ಅಂತ ಹೇಳ್ತಾ ಇದ್ರು. 2ನೇ ತಲೆಮಾರಿನವರು ಭಾರತದಲ್ಲಿ ವಾಸವಾಗಿದ್ದಾರೆ, ಹಿಂದಿ ಮಾಧ್ಯಮದಲ್ಲಿ ಕಲಿತಾರೆ, ಮತ್ತೆ ಮೈಸೂರು ಚಾಮರಾಜನಗರದಲ್ಲಿರುವಂತಹ ಬೌದ್ಧ ಸಂಸ್ಥೆಗಳ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ನಮಗೆ ತಿಳಿಸ್ತಾರೆ. ನಳಂದ ಬುದ್ಧಿಸಂ ಶಾಖೆಯನ್ನ ಹೇಗೆ ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಪ್ರಚಾರ ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ ಅನ್ನೋದು, ಮತ್ತೆ ದಲೈ ಲಾಮಾ ಅವರು ಎಷ್ಟು ಬಾರಿ ಭೇಟಿ ಕೊಟ್ಟರು, 108 ಬಾರಿ ನಮ್ಮ ಕರ್ನಾಟಕಕ್ಕೆ ಭೇಟಿ ಕೊಟ್ಟರು ಅಂತ ಹೇಳ್ತಾರೆ. ಅಮೆರಿಕ, ಐರ್ಲ್ಯಾಂಡ್ನಲ್ಲೆಲ್ಲ ಒಂದೇ ಭಾಷೆ ಮಾತಾಡ್ತಾರೆ, ಆದರೆ ನಾವು ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಬಹುಭಾಷಾ ಬಹು ಸಂಸ್ಕೃತಿಯನ್ನ ಹೊಂದಿರೋರು. ಅಂಬೇಡ್ಕರ್ ಅವರನ್ನ ನೆನೆಸ್ಕೊಳ್ತಾ ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಜನ ಎಲ್ಲ ಒಂದಾಗಿರೋದಕ್ಕೆ ಒಂದು ದೃಢ ಮನಸ್ಸು ಮಾಡಿದ್ದಾರೆ ಅಂತ ಕೂಡ ಹೇಳ್ತಾರೆ. ಭಾಷೆ ಮತ್ತೆ ಸಂಸ್ಕೃತಿಯ ಮೂಲಕ ಶಾಂತಿ ಸ್ಥಾಪನೆ ಮಾಡಬಹುದು ಅಂತ ಹೇಳ್ತಾ ಅವ್ರ ಭಾಷಣವನ್ನ ಅಂತ್ಯಗೊಳಿಸ್ತಾರೆ.
Thank you, sir, for bringing to the limelight the unity in diversity of our country. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, it is an honor to invite our keynote speaker, Professor Rajendra Chenni, a distinguished academic from Kuvempu University, to deliver the keynote address. Professor Chenni brings to us a wealth of knowledge from his scholarship in language, literature, and linguistics. His association with Kuvempu University's Department of English underscores his deep engagement with academic excellence and cultural discourse. Please join me in giving Professor Chenni a warm welcome as he comes forward to share with us his thoughts.
I'm very grateful to the Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor Ramesh, Dr. Jyoti Venkatesh, the coordinator of this international conference, my friends and colleagues at the university, and ladies and gentlemen. Being a writer, while listening to those who spoke before me, I was trying to gather up some metaphors which would give some kind of a structure to the rambling thoughts I'm planning to share with you. The first one was a very heartwarming memory that our friend was sharing of how his parents walked all the way and came here because there was a center where the message of the great Buddha had to be shared with communities which also have very powerful memories of someone who brought enlightenment not to himself but to all human communities in the world. This relates to the theme of my keynote address, mainly because languages and cultures have been created in human history by those who have walked, by those who have migrated, and by those who have, for some reason or the other, wandered from one end of the world to the other. Therefore, for example, scholars tell us that nearly 65,000 years ago, a migration happened out of Africa when a group of humans
walked all the way more or less to the Indian subcontinent. And they were here for some time and continued their journey. The evidence and the proof that a group of humans came here is in our DNA because they are our ancestors and we share a component of the DNA. They not only left the evidence in our blood, in our DNA, but also in our cultural memories, because this is how languages have grown and developed all across the world. The other metaphor that I was able to gather from another speaker this morning was towards the conclusion of his speech when he said, how do all these things begin? In very normal, ordinary circumstances where, as Peggy would describe them, Peggy Mohan, little men, ordinary men, unnoticed human beings sit together and say, let's begin a conversation, tell me what is your story. The memories and the wanderings and the stories, they constitute the inalienable cultural memories that we have of languages and of diversities in human languages and human cultures. A conference of this kind, I think, is a proper forum where we try to retrieve these memories, because they are, the cultural memories are the storehouse of the resourcefulness which can create a sustainable world for us in the future. Since the time allocated to me is a little limited, let me take you through three of the major arguments that I plan to present in my keynote. The first one is about these stories which tell us how these conversations and dialogues among human beings have started. Professor Shetter, a very renowned historian from Karnataka, tells us that centuries ago, probably during the regime of Emperor Ashoka, a man called Chapada walked all the way from what happens to be Afghanistan today, and he reached some of the places associated with Buddhism and the Ashokan edicts in a part of Karnataka near Koppala and Sannati. He came here because he was an expert in carving the stone edicts, and the King Ashoka wanted to communicate the messages of the great Buddha and his own belief in non-violent and harmonious living by creating these public narratives, by using the little and the big rocks on which the messages would be carved. And Chapada, an expert who knew the Kharosti language, came all the way to Karnataka. And this was probably the first introduction of Kannada culture to the use of a linguistic script. And it was also one of the most important events when a Prakrit language, Pali, was introduced to us, because all of us really recollect that two of the greatest founders of two great religions, the Buddha and Mahavira, had decided that if at all the message of dharma has to be spread, it has to be in the languages of the common people. And the Buddha chose Pali, one of the Prakrit languages, for this purpose. And later, when the Jaina religion entered Karnataka, the scholars, the poets, in fact it is known as the Jaina age in Karnataka history, they also chose Prakrit before they turn towards Sanskrit. I think there's a lesson to be learned here, because culture and dharma are not the exclusive property of the elite classes. And they have been nurtured, they have been preserved by the little men, the common people. This is one of the stories that we recollect. The other story is there were generations of Sufis who visited many places in India, and they were the architects of a syncretic religion and a syncretic culture here in India. And some of them came down to South India, and in a place called Bijapur, now known as Vijaypura, one of the Sufi sects remained there, and in one of the Khanakas supported by the Adil Shahi kings of that time, began to not only spread the message of the Sufi religion, but also to transform the Sufi religion. And the point I want to make is, it is not the institutionalized religions with support of political power which have the power to transform themselves, to reimagine themselves, and to reach out to the common people. It is these sects which begin a dialogue and a conversation with the poorest of the poor, with those who have been orphaned by the powers of the state. It is these sects which take the message of true religion. And one such thing happened in Karnataka, when the Sufi sect, which had probably come from somewhere around Delhi in North India, and the sect brought the Dehlavi language here, supposed to be one of the prototypes for the Hindi language. And what did they achieve here? They did something which I do not think we have the courage to imagine in the contemporary world. They were believers in the Islamic religion, though of course the Sufi sect was also a rebellious sect, and it in a way rewrote and reconstructed some of the aspects of the Islamic religion. They created a social space here in Karnataka, where there was a very intimate conversation between the religions which existed here and the Sufi religion. And this has much to do with languages, because though they had come here with the knowledge of the Dehlavi, they created a language of extreme hybridity in order to write their songs and poems. And I'm talking about this extreme hybridity of a language because a sect like the Sufi sect, reaching out to the common people, kept the boundaries between languages open, porous, so that the one language could easily interact with the other. Just as I said a while ago, that institutional religions do not usually possess the flexibility and the openness. Similarly, when languages are taken over by the elite classes, they also construct very rigid boundaries, and to that extent, the conversation with other languages is prevented. But what happens here is the Sufis not only mingle with the common people, they allow this interaction between the Dehlavi and the Kannada language here, and taking them to extreme hybridity in the poetic language they use. If the younger generation here has not heard or read these Sufi poems, this is an occasion to do so, because you will find that in these songs of the Sufis of Vijaypura, the first half of a poetic line is in Urdu plus Dehlavi, and the second part of the same poetic line is in Kannada. The third line of the song begins with an invocation of Allah, the Supreme God, and the second part of the third line is an invocation of a Hindu god. This is the strength and the power of language and culture. When we allow languages and cultures the freedom, when we allow them to sustain themselves through not only such conversations, through interactions, through assimilation, through borrowal, etc. This, I think, is the true story of languages and cultures, especially in India, which the great linguist Ganesh Devi, in his recently published book, has named as the linguistic civilization. We are citizens and members of a linguistic civilization, and there is every need that we now return to the resources we had in the pre-modern world for an open-ended dialogue between cultures and between languages. I am saying this, I am underlining this because the apprehension in the minds of most people is somehow this power of communication, this power of communion with other cultures seem to have weakened because of a number of reasons. Some of them I'll be mentioning later in my keynote. Now the issue before us is to explore how all this happened in the past. I have suggested one of the reasons, and the reasons is that there were alternatives to what the regimes of the time, the institutions of power at that time, the institutions of religion at that time were trying to impose on the society. And the alternatives, as one of the great sociologists of our time has explained, in order to understand this alternative, you may have to think about a pyramid-like structure in a society. At the broad base, you have the ordinary people and the common people, and they are there to provide a powerful foundation for intercultural dialogues. And as you go towards the tip of the pyramid, it is very narrow, and that is where you have probably the powerful elite class, which talks about the purity of languages. Pardon me for saying this, which may appear like an extreme statement. Purity is what destroys languages. It's not for purity that we should be talking about. We should be talking about the healthy impurities which every human language should collect from other languages. And these are at the top of that pyramid, the guardians of purity. And many times this notion of purity of language is imagined, it is constructed, it's not a historical reality. Look at the development of any language in the world, and you will find that at some stage or the other, the language has energized itself through open borrowal, you see, open borrowal, both in the substratum of grammar, in the lexis, in the so-called group of words a language uses, the gestures, the possibilities of linguistic communication. In every domain of language, there has been this constant effort to take, to assimilate. And that, I think, is what one should be returning to. We should also here think about the way in which certain historical developments seem to come in the way of this very spontaneous and natural gift which human beings have. I would say, first of all, it is what I have already elaborated upon, the way in which the pundits, the so-called linguists, those who have power over the direction which a language or a culture can take. It is the dictates which come in the way of this dialogue and conversation. The second one I would say is that as the societies become more and more complex, there is always this possibility of one language or one culture or one subculture becoming dominant and claiming a role of authority over the other languages and the other cultures. And this, I think, has later, I'm of course making a leap from one phase of history to the other. As we move towards the modern period, it is the notions of nationalism which quickly turn into notions of a hyper-nationalism, which start building these not bridges but walls. And that is where cultural identities become rigid. Linguistic identities become rigid. In my view, this rigidity is related to the end of the liberal open communities and the notions of the modern notions of nation and nationalism. I'm not saying that we can imagine a world without nations and nationalism. I'm only saying that there's a vulnerability in this conception of becoming rigid, and that's where we begin to imagine languages as giving to denizens and citizens of a territory a rigid, unchanging kind of identity, that this is your linguistic identity and this is the language of the nation. This may have some practical, pragmatic uses, but it has certain risks also as far as crossing the boundaries, crossing over to the other cultures and other languages is concerned. There are other factors also which I may not be able to elaborate upon. If we come to the contemporary situation, this is the last part of the keynote which I am summarizing here. I am drawing upon the contribution made by three of the very important scholars. This is again for the benefit of the young students here who constitute the largest part of the audience. Three scholars have deliberated upon the nature, the possibilities, and the challenges before multiculturalism. And we need to learn from them. One is Bhikkhu Parikh, Lord Bhikkhu Parikh. He who has consistently written about the challenges before the contemporary world. Let me summarize his arguments in just a few minutes. Lord Bhikkhu Parikh says that we have all agreed upon, and it is a political consensus now, agreed that we believe in a liberal, democratic, political system. Most of us, all across the world, if not in practice, at least ideologically, we believe in a liberal, democratic, political system. And the way in which liberalism has grown as a philosophy, developed as a political philosophy in the world is that you recognize the absolute freedom of the individual. You recognize the freedom of choice for the individual, and this is the foundation on which you create your political system if you believe in the liberal democratic system. But the question is large-scale migrations of communities from elsewhere, if they have come here, and if these cultures, imagine, let's say, a nation like the USA, where you are forced, despite what is right now happening there, you are forced to admit that it's a nation of nations, you see, and it's a federation of so many nations, cultures as nations, right? Now, the issue is, if these large migrant communities have brought along with them, while settling here, their own unique cultural identities, cultural practices, belief systems, ways of life, and they want to adhere to it, and they want to keep it, nurture it, how would you bring these diverse cultures, diverse worldviews, diverse belief systems under one governance? This, I think, is the crucial political challenge before multiculturalism. Because on the one hand, you have not only to assure, but also ensure to each of these cultural groups the freedom to remain with their cultures, to nurture the identities and languages. What then are the solutions? If you insist on total integration, assimilation, you are saying that, all right, you have settled with us, now you assimilate yourselves into our dominant culture. To that extent, you are taking away from them their inalienable right, because they want their culture. Now, how are you going to do that? If you are offering the strategy of assimilation, you have limitations once again. To what extent can one culture assimilate itself into another and yet remain the same culture? We do not know the proper answer to this question. So I would say that we all across the world today now are we are now struggling to find strategies to a very complex problem. We want a world without conflicts. We want a peaceful world. We want a world where processes of globalization, mind-boggling information technology, possibilities of going across the world, these technologies are themselves demanding one world. They are demanding a harmonious world. They are demanding a peaceful world. Now, in order to create such a world, what we require is a continuation of the dialogue that I have been mentioning. What was possible in the pre-modern world? What was possible for the Sufis? What was possible for the 12th century? We wish safety, well-being of all living things. Sakala Jivatmagala, you see. Now, this is what we want to enshrine in our political systems. This is what we want to enshrine in the world as a solution, as one of the possible ways in which humanity can grow. For doing that, I think it is essential for us to understand what languages can do and what cultures should do. And my argument throughout the last few minutes for which I have been speaking is that it is time for us to revisit the notions of culture, community, and language. We need to revisit these concepts, try to understand that they can be reimagined. We should not get trapped. I think I heard one of the speakers saying language can be freedom, it can also be a trap, right? We do not want to get trapped into old stereotypical notions what a community should be, what a nation should be, what a culture should be. We want to reimagine all these so that bridges are built once again, thoroughfares, roads become open between cultures, etc. I know I should not conclude by giving you a false confidence that it is easily achievable. It's not. On the one hand, we have narratives and stories, cultural memories of harmonious living among human communities. We have also had strife. We have also had violent, disagreements. We have also had assertions which have led to fragmentation. Let us take a hard look at all these realities and then try to reframe the way we can now imagine the idea of language and culture. I would like to converse to learn in such fora as the one provided by the international conference here. I want to appeal to the young ones here. Please devote your time to the study of multiculturalism, to the histories of diversities of languages in this globe, and try to emotionally, in order to understand the past history, and more importantly, to move towards a continuation. I'm not saying we're doing it from the scratch. There are these past legacies. There are these intellectual models. Let's make them relevant to the contemporary challenges, and that, I think, is what an academic community like ours can do. My apologies to Dr. Jyoti Venkatesh for taking more time than what was given to me, and I thank you all for your patient listening.
Thank you, Professor, for enriching our mornings with your stories and discourse about the power of language as a true tool for
the Honorable Chancellor of Bengaluru City University, Professor Ramesh, cher Dr. Jyoti Venkatesh, distinguished guests on and off stage, professors, guests from here and far, last but not least, dear students here present, bonjour, namaskara. Yeah, you see, just one word is enough for world peace. You say namaskara here and peace is there. Men often hate each other because they fear each other. They fear each other because they don't know each other. They don't know each other because they cannot communicate. Whenever someone is rubbing you the wrong way, whenever you're faced with a conflict in life, in your personal life, you have two choices, two alternatives. You can either use your most important in our days and ages. So we're thinking about three questions. Why is this conference and other such endeavors so important? The three questions I was asking myself is how, Why and what for? How does it work? Why words can help? And what are foreign languages for? What's the use of foreign languages in that? And since my own words are limited, and as you notice, the French like quotes, instead of giving my answers, I'm going to try and answer those questions. How does it work? Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response.